If we're family, you should forgive me for stealing money.
That's what my husband Ken was thinking as he took money from my wallet. But when he was caught for the first time, he didn't say anything that terrible. He apologized honestly and returned the money. I ended up letting it slide, but then it was revealed that he had also stolen money from our son. When I found out, I decided to tell my son and mother-in-law who I live with about my husband's misdeeds. There's no need to be considerate of a man who causes trouble not only for me, but also for our son. I kept quiet to both of you, but actually my husband, I angrily exposed Ken's wrongdoing. My name is Marie Anderson. I'm a 46-year-old part-time housewife. I married Ken, who I thought was a good husband and a serious office worker, 20 years ago. We live with our 17-year-old son, Troy, and my mother-in-law, Susan, as a family of 4. Recently, Troy has become cold due to his rebellious phase, but he's actually a kind boy who's working hard to study for college. I know his rebellious phase will pass, so I'll be patient until then. Susan just lost her husband Dan to illness. They used to live together, but we thought it would be difficult for elderly Susan to continue living alone, so she moved in with us. However, Susan, who lost her beloved husband, has been in a constant state of low spirits. It's worrying because she's usually a mild-mannered and cheerful person. I try to be as kind as possible to her and do my best to reduce her emotional burden. Despite these problems, we were an ordinary family and relatively happy every day. However, happiness can go away without warning. One day, when I went shopping and tried to pay, I noticed that 3 $10 bills were missing. I was sure I had put them in my wallet after withdrawing them from the ATM the day before. My wallet was securely stored in my bag, so it was unlikely that the bills had slipped out and fallen on the roadside. Did someone take it? An unpleasant thought crossed my mind, but I had no solid evidence. The amount of money lost was only $30, so I decided to stop pursuing it deeply and watch the situation. But the next morning, more money was missing. This time, $50 was gone. I was sure it was in my wallet when I checked the night before. The wallet had been inside the house all night, and there were no signs of a thief. I didn't want to think about it, but I could only assume that someone in the family had taken it. I had to talk to Ken about it.
After explaining the situation in detail, he hesitantly said, "Actually, I know who did it. It's Troy."
Ken said with shifty eyes.
What?
I couldn't believe it. No matter how rebellious he might be, he wouldn't stoop to stealing money. Ken's shifty eyes were also concerning. So I proposed,
All right, I'll talk to Troy myself. I think he'll be more likely to open up to me since we spend more time together.
Ken quickly agreed. I didn't believe what he said. On the contrary, I was suspicious of his nervous demeanor. To get to the bottom of it, I bought a security camera and placed it in an inconspicuous spot. I made sure my bag with the wallet inside was visible in the camera view and left it for a day. When I checked my wallet, another $50 was missing. Upon reviewing the recorded footage, the culprit was clearly visible. It wasn't Troy, it was Ken. He made sure no one was around and took money from my wallet without hesitation. I was furious. Not only was he stealing money, but he was also trying to pin it on our son. It was unforgivable.
When confronted with the evidence, Ken fumbled. "No, this isn't what it looks like. This is,
You are the one stealing the money, no matter how you look at it. Why did you do this?
Ken finally confessed.
I have gambling debts."
I was shocked. I had no idea he was gambling or had debts.
Is that true? Yes, it's not a lie.
He showed me documents proving he had a total debt of $5,100.
I was at a loss for words.
I desperately tried to explain myself. I thought you'd get angry if I told you the truth, so I blamed Troy. I feel terrible for lying and keeping quiet about the debts. I have a plan to repay it, and I'm paying it back little by little from my salary. Troy can still go to college, and your life won't be affected.
He repeatedly apologized and returned the money. He seemed genuinely sorry, so I decided to forgive him.
Okay, I'll trust you this time. But if you do this again, I won't forgive you.
I warned him. I warned him firmly. But I didn't want to burden Troy and Susan with this, so I decided to keep quiet for now. However, when it rains, it pours. Our real ordeal was just beginning. A week after discovering his debts, Ken stopped stealing from my wallet, keeping his promise. But one day he came home with a gloomy face and said his salary had been cut. According to him, the company's performance had been declining, and there was no choice but to lower salaries. His pay had been reduced by nearly $1,100.
With debts and Troy's college expenses, what are we gonna do?
I was at a loss. After some thought, I decided to take on more part-time work. I got a job at a 24-hour fast food restaurant working from late night to early morning. It would be physically demanding, but the night shift paid more, so I decided to give it a try. Naturally, I had to talk to Troy and Susan about this, so I called them to the living room. However, Troy said he had something serious to discuss and looked quite concerned, so I decided to listen to him first. I assumed it was about college or studying, but what he said next was completely unexpected.
Hey, for about a week now, I've noticed that money has been disappearing from my piggy bank. Then yesterday, I saw Dad opening my piggy bank. When I asked him what he was doing, he tried to brush it off as if it was nothing, but it was suspicious.
I was at a loss for words.
Susan looked incredulous too.
I wondered if Ken had targeted Troy. The idea that my husband could be stealing money from our son was unbearable. But Ken had a history of trying to pin his misdeeds on Troy, and was also desperate for money. At that moment, Susan spoke up.
You know, when Ken was in high school, he once tried to steal a video game he had borrowed from a classmate. I thought he learned his lesson after I scolded him. But come to think of it, things would often go missing in the club I belonged to during college. Ken was a member of that club too.
Considering all this, it was natural to think of Ken as the culprit. For now, I decided to keep Troy's piggy bank.
So Mom, you have something to talk to me about too, right? What's going on?
I told the two of them.
Actually, I'll be working part-time jobs in the mornings and evenings.
Why? Do you or Ken need that much money?
Susan asked. I hesitated over how much to share, but ultimately decided to tell them everything. There was no need to be considerate of a man who had caused trouble for not only me, but also our son.
I kept quiet about it, but the truth is, Ken,
I disclosed Ken's misdeeds, fueled by anger. 2 weeks later, Troy, Susan, and I stopped Ken, who claimed to be working on a holiday, and brought him to the living room.
What's going on? I have to go to work, so make it quick.
I gave him a cold look.
you're lying about working on a holiday. You've actually quit your job, haven't you?
Ken's face instantly turned pale.
There's no way I quit my job. That's ridiculous.
How many lives does it take for you to be happy? I called your company and asked them directly, so there's no mistake.
I yelled at him and Ken flinched and froze.
You apparently resigned due to personal reasons. But the truth is, you were stealing money from your coworkers' wallets, and you quit because you were about to get caught, right?
He stared blankly as if to ask how I could possibly know that. I had called one of his former colleagues who reluctantly told me the truth.
It was about 2 months ago. A female coworker noticed that money was missing from her wallet, and then similar incidents kept happening. Ken had mentioned having debts during a drinking party, and he was always looking at people's wallets and bags. Besides, there were rumors in his department that things would definitely go missing. The missing items were things like pens and paper clips, so the damage wasn't that much. And since there was no proof that it was theft, we let it go.
The colleague didn't outright say that Ken was the culprit, but it seemed she believed that it was highly likely.
It was you, wasn't it?
I confronted him in a low voice and he nodded with a frightened look on his face.
Yes.
But his secrets didn't end there. I pulled out an envelope and took several photos from it. As soon as he saw them, he quickly turned his face away. But I shoved the photos in front of him anyway. In the photos, Ken was walking hand in hand with a beautiful woman.
This is clearly an affair. I hired a private investigator to look into it. Be prepared to pay damages.
I glared at Ken and he started nervously babbling about his affair.
I met her by chance on the street, and before I knew it, I fell in love with her. She said she loves me too.
I was even more infuriated, so I decided to deliver another blow to Ken.
Ken, do you know your lover's real name?
Of course it's Yvonne Baker.
He looked puzzled as to why I was asking such a question, so I told him the truth.
Sorry, that's a fake name. Her real name is Julie Meyer. She has a criminal record for fraud.
No way. She would never commit fraud.
He stubbornly denied it, so I showed him an online article about Julie Meyer on my phone. The article mentioned her arrest for fraud, and her face was in the photo next to it. It was the same face as Ken's lover.
Well, what do you think now? She probably approached you to swindle money from you.
I said in a disgusted tone, and Ken mumbled.
That can't be. Incel apart.
Seeing Ken's despair-filled face, I felt a little refreshed. This is what he got for having an affair. It's ironic that a liar like Ken attracted a con artist. Birds of a feather do flock together, I guess. I was angry, but at the same time I was astounded. However, I still had more to say to Ken. I showed him a piece of paper.
It was a divorce form. I can't be married to a man like you anymore. I will definitely divorce you. Hurry up and fill it out.
Ken then said,
I have debts and no job now. If I get divorced now, I'll be in financial trouble. I admit I stole, but it wasn't a lot of money. I was just borrowing it and intended to return it. If we were family, you should forgive me for stealing money.
He shamelessly prostrated himself. He chose another woman over me and claimed he intended to return the money, but I was skeptical about how true that was. I was about to yell at Ken, but then a loud voice interrupted.
Ines,
It was Susan.
it's not about the amount of money or being family. Stealing is wrong. How can you, as an adult, not understand that? And on top of that, you had an affair. I can't think of you as my own son anymore. I will cut ties with you from now on.
Ken's face immediately looked like he was about to cry.
But you're my mother. Can't you defend me a little?
Since he shamelessly pleaded, I decided to give him a sarcastic response.
When I told Susan about the debt and how you stole my money, she was incredibly angry. She was the one who suggested calling your company and hiring a private investigator. When I explained why I had to take a part-time job, she was furious, saying, "What is he thinking? Causing trouble for his precious family." There was no trace of her usual gentle demeanor. She looked like a demon.
We can't let this go on. We must take revenge. He must be hiding something else. So let's investigate thoroughly, she said, and swiftly organized our revenge plan.
It's true that kind people are scary when they get angry.
Upon learning this, Ken must have realized that relying on his mother would be useless. This time he tried to get Troy to be on his side.
Hey, you don't want your dad to disappear, right? Stand by my side. But Troy also glared at Ken with a red face.
I don't need a thief and cheater for a father. How dare you betray Mom?
Abandoned by his son, Ken seemed to finally realize that he had no one on his side. He was sobbing, but Susan sternly said, "Apologize to Marie and Troy."
Overwhelmed by her forcefulness, he apologized to us profusely. I'm truly sorry. I regret what I have done.
But it was too late for an apology. I couldn't forgive him.
If you're really sorry, grant my wish. Sign the divorce papers immediately. If you resist any further, I'll take you to court.
When I once again thrust the divorce papers at him, Ken finally gave in and signed them. Afterward, we retrieved the money he stole from Troy and kicked Ken out of the house. I also filed the divorce papers. Through a lawyer, I demanded compensation from Ken and his mistress. Perhaps sensing the gravity of the situation, they quickly paid in full. After that, Ken seemed to be in quite a financial bind. Not only gambling, but he had also been lavishing his mistress with luxury goods, resulting in an actual debt of about $13,000. He must have piled on even more debt to pay the compensation, but I couldn't care less. To make matters worse, Ken was dumped by his mistress, who was probably only after his money. He wanted to sue her for fraud, but in the end, he gave up, since he had been the one giving her gifts because he wanted to. Moreover, 2 months after the divorce, Ken was arrested for embezzling company funds. I made sure to inform Ken's previous company that he was a habitual thief. We even considered reporting him to the police ourselves, but decided to leave it to the affected company employees.
My husband has a habit of lying, so there might be other things he's hiding.
I warned them, and the company apparently conducted a thorough investigation of its finances. As a result, his embezzlement was discovered. How many crimes would that man have to commit before he was satisfied? It was a relief to have cut ties with him. If I hadn't, I might have been implicated in his crimes. Having lost Ken as the breadwinner, I managed to secure a full-time job through an acquaintance. I earned enough to support Troy and Susan. Susan is also working part-time. When Ken and I got divorced, she said, "I'm sorry for the trouble my son has caused. I can't impose on you any longer, so I'll move out."
But living alone as an elderly person is worrisome, and both Troy and I love her.
You and Ken are completely different people.
I consider you an important part of my family, so please stay with us forever.
We managed to persuade her to stay. As she started working part-time and adapting to a new life, she seemed to regain her energy little by little. She even smiles more often these days. Troy, who was greatly shocked by the whole incident, also seems to be recovering. Sometimes he helps with household chores, perhaps sensing our family situation. Peaceful days are about to return to our home. I too am determined to forget about Ken and move forward with a positive attitude to live my own life. I want to work hard to support my family from now on. I know that a bright future is waiting for us.